Good morning, all. I'm Nick Moss, Senior Solutions Architect at Saepio. Been here 8 years. I worked in cyber for about 22 years now, since before it's called cyber, as they say. Saying goes. So this is in a series of webinars that Saepio have been running with some of our trusted partners, such as Mimecast. This is one specifically around data protection. So what we're going to cover, I guess, today is I worked in cyber for 22 years. 16 of those have been in data protection related areas and roles, and kind of preventing data leaving your organization sounds like it should be security 101. It's up there with email security, endpoints, vulnerability management, backup, right? But for some reason, it's not something that everyone does. And so why is that? I mean, a big factor is it's hard to do. And truth be told, it's always been hard to do. I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say I've seen many customers successfully complete a full DLP project in the last 20 years. But why is that the case? Why is it hard? Firstly, most companies have lots of data, right? And year on year, they have more of it. And large volumes of data plus multiple locations stored in just makes things trickier, right? So historically, DLP solutions wanted to classify data first. That classification can take ages. I've seen people take 6 months to classify like 3 terabytes of data, like 6 months. And even then, the classification is based on a logic. It's a regex. It's a pattern match, right? It doesn't have the context of the data. So what we're saying is you can spend months of work to attempt to classify your data. Even then, you're only assuming the data is classified correctly. You actually know what and where your crown jewels are. So sometimes people didn't go down the data classification route. They went down the least privilege route. And I can't sit here with my experience and say least privilege is a bad thing. It is a good thing to do, but it's difficult, right? It's hard and expensive to even get the visibility. And then it's hard, expensive, and incredibly time consuming to implement to get that kind of least privilege access model, right? So sometimes people do both. So imagine how long that took, right? So even then, we had assumptions of what our current data was, where it lived, and who had access. We still actually have DLP, right? And we might spend hundreds of thousands of pounds in multiple years to get to that standpoint. So, like I said, it was hard, and it's getting harder, right? So paradigm shift, the AI tools, landscape has changed again. Each subsequent digital transformation initiative, the landscape changes again. There has to be a better way, quicker way to get more coverage and control without the punitive commercial entry point or the months and years before that gap is even halfway filled. Like, first thing we need to do, as in most areas of cyber, in my opinion, is we need to understand the situation before we can improve it. We need visibility, not so much about where data is, but actually where it's going, because that's the key thing. We want to stop the data exfiltrating or leaving. Where it is right now, well, it's important, but it's not the key thing is stopping losing it. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Malcolm from Mimecast, who could talk through the Mimecast and Cyber platform and how this could help. So, Malcolm, thank you for hosting me today. Over to you.
Yep, thanks, Nick. Thanks very much. So my name is Malcolm Murphy. I'm Incydr risk specialist at Mimecast. What does that mean? That means I work with organizations, talking with them about how they can get visibility into the movement of their trusted, valuable data assets beyond their network, outside of their control, to places that those data assets shouldn't be going. I think, Nick, you raised some of the key points there in your introduction. The classic approach that we've all grown up with or tried to implement over the last 10, 15, 20 years is based on a paradigm of starting from the model of data loss prevention. It starts from a thing that says, well, identify all of my data assets. Well, good luck with that, first of all, because in organizations up and down the land right now, people are making more data assets. So just identifying even the view I had of the data inside my organization as of 5 p.m. yesterday, at 10 o'clock this morning, it's out of date. because people are creating.
It's like painting the Forth Road Bridge, right? Isn't it? You never finish it.
Yeah, it is. So we start from take NIST critical security controls. Identify authorized data assets, physical assets, network connections, etc. It feels like a sensible thing to do, right up until the point where you try and do it. So identifying everything is a big job. Classifying it correctly is a big job. And I was reminded again as you were talking of a sort of CISO roundtable I attended 3 or 4 months ago, and the topic of DLP came up, and somebody made what I thought was quite a bold assertion, which was, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was, the person said, in 20 years of doing this, I've never seen a DLP project be successful. It put that bomb in the middle of the table, and I thought this is going to cause much discussion and debate now. Everybody round the table nodded and agreed, and for exactly these reasons. But let's suppose that you could do both those things. Let's suppose you could identify everything, and let's suppose you could classify everything reasonably accurately. That still doesn't help you, because really what you want to do is the next step, which is define the policies about what is and isn't allowed to move from A to B. And again, Nick, you used a really powerful word in your introduction. You used the word context, because that context of the data movement is very, very important. And again, where I'm sure people out there will resonate with what I'm about to say, where you put a rule or a policy or a constraint in place that conflicts with what the business is trying to do. So I have a policy that says Malcolm is not allowed to move this document from A to B. Well, if Malcolm needs to move this document from A to B for the purposes of his job, and this is where the analogy stretches a little bit, Malcolm is suitably senior that he's allowed to shout when he's not allowed to do his job, then that conflict between IT and, quote, the business, usually it's IT, it's cyber that yields.
Yeah.
So, and probably for good reason. We're here to support what the business does. We're not here to put rules in place that should be followed slavishly. So IT is as an enabler. So we're trying to got this dynamic tension between put the right protection in place, but the mechanism by which we've got to do it classically is incredibly heavyweight and incredibly prone to conflict. So that's why, some of the reasons why I think I make the assertion, broadly speaking, the classic approach to DLP, it doesn't always fail, but it's incredibly difficult to get right. And it is definitely labor intensive to get right.
It takes a long time, right?
Yeah. And it takes a long time to get right. And it takes a lot of effort to maintain. Because even if, let's come back to what I said earlier. So even if I had the perfect picture at 9 o'clock this morning, my organization is not a fixed thing. More stuff's being created, more things are being done. The picture I had in my head when I left the office yesterday is out of date. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And then I'll complicate things further, which is my user population, the people who work in my organization, they're changing as well. I think about things, I think about like the consumerization of IT. People are used to things moving quickly. They've got phones in their pocket, they've got iPads at home. They're used to working in a certain way. And where corporate IT is perhaps not as flexible or not as dynamic, users, and we see this a lot, users find a way. So there's this extra force in play, which is, what are people actually doing with your physical assets and your data assets? The answer, based on my experience of working with organizations on the inside of risk, is stuff you want to expect. And that's a challenge. If you don't know it's happening, how do you protect the organization against the risks of that?
Yeah, so known knowns.
Yeah, unknown. There's the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
Having said that's the landscape in which we've come from and what we're used to. Okay, how can we do things differently? Well, the title on this slide kind of gives you an insight into how we think. Because the first, it says see and stop data loss. And that's where we tend to approach this from a mindset of stop data loss. I'm going to make the assertion, the first thing you need to do is see what's actually happening. I will make this claim as well. Well, it's not a claim, it's a statement of fact. It might sound surprising, but every organization I've worked with over the past year where we've deployed Mimecast technology, Incydr risk technology, either in pilot or production, without fail, 100% success rate on this so far. Every organization has seen something that they didn't know was happening and that was sufficiently interesting to warrant investigation. That's
and just so we use Incydr internally at Saepio. We discovered a member of staff who we thought was quite happily and settled was actually like getting CV help by AI agents. So I could testify to that from my own experience.
Yeah. So that visibility it empowers the organization to start thinking about what protection the organization needs against data movement. And one of the things I don't want to make work for people. One of the things we often find is you deploy the technology, you see something's happening, and then the question is, okay, do we allow that or not? And this is where organizations suddenly find that their acceptable use policy was written 10 years ago, it was written pre-pandemic perhaps, and hasn't been updated. And we haven't thought about what users actually want to do or actually are doing. So seeing what's going on is key. What I've got on this picture here is essentially 6, and I would say they're representative use cases. I'll explain them in a little bit more detail right now. But before I do, we talked about the challenges with the classic approach to the problem, which is very data-centric and very classification-heavy. The way we think about the problem and the way we approach this is probably from the other end of the spectrum. We're looking specifically at the movement of data. So as you said, Nick, if a data asset sits somewhere, it probably wants to know where it is, and there's a whole thing I need to think about for my data at rest, not least for regulatory purposes, but for the purposes of what we're talking about today, it's the movement of data that I'm interested in. And specifically, so in order to form a picture of risk, we are going to look at 3 things. Where did the data asset come from? So did it come from a network drive? Did it come from SharePoint or OneDrive? Did it come from a web application like Salesforce or Workday or something like that? Where did it move to? So did someone move it to a personal G drive or a personal Git repo, or did they email it to their personal email address, or did they email it to a generic AOL, Yahoo, Gmail address? Is that? And I'm not looking for movement in general. I'm looking for movement to places that are outside of my trusted zones.
Yeah.
So where did it come from? Where did it go to? And then the third thing is who moved it and what do we know about them? So the obvious one, it's the top center example here with departing employees. I might know because HR have told me, hey, Nick's handed his notice in. I'm sure you haven't, Nick, but let's suppose you hand your notice in. We all know, everybody on this call knows that at that point, an employee who's handed their notice in feels some sense of entitlement to corporate data. Salespeople will take client lists. Designers will take things they've worked on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all know subjectively that it happens. We all know a friend of a friend who's done it. Organizationally, how do you get visibility into that? And how do you defend against it? Well, in this case, as I said, it's a characteristic of the person. And at an organizational level, I can use the fact that I know this person has handed their notice in to enrich my picture of the risk associated with that. I can look a little bit more closely at those.
It's an interesting thing I just thought of, Mark. You've been through scores of customer installs, POCs, POV.
Yeah.
When you're finding those kind of things people don't know about, what's the ratio of kind of them being insider, like employee-based misconduct or accidental misconduct versus actual kind of external kind of attack, or it's not as easy to say?
Well, predominantly, it's the insider.
I think historically, DLP's been framed as kind of someone's going to come in and steal your data. Is it more a case of it's kind of leaking?
I think
seeping out there. Right?
I think the risk specifically I'm talking about here is the risk of your people who've already got access to the data. People who are allowed to have access to the data doing something untoward with it. And I need to say this, and we'll talk about what I've labelled as shadow Gen AI here. Oftentimes that's inadvertent. So we tend to think about an intentionally malicious either adversary or insider. And yes, that happens. But organizationally, there's I'll say a big risk of people just doing the wrong thing. So what do I mean by shadow Gen AI? I probably mean people using AI tools, because let's face it, we're being told you can't open a newspaper or turn on the TV or listen to the radio right now without being told, hey, use AI, whether it's Copilot, and the pizza advert that's Copilot, the $1 slice that I can't get away from right now, or whatever it might be. Use AI tools to improve your productivity. We're all being told that. So that's what our people are doing. But our people are not necessarily well versed with the risks. So they are using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever they feel most comfortable with using. I'll say probably not, based on what I'm seeing in real organizations that we're working with, they're probably not using the corporate sanctioned tool. So why is that a problem? Let me give you a real example. And this is from a medical insurer. An analyst at said medical insurer was given an 85-ish page document, a reasonably chunky document that contained a load of claims information, patient data, medical conditions, medical outcomes, and was asked to produce a summary of essentially the value for money and the cost and with the premiums. Do a financial analysis of this big cohort of medical claims and tell me, are we making money or not? So said analyst did what I've just described. They did what they think they've been told to do, and it went out, and said analyst used ChatGPT to produce that summary. But it was their own free OpenAI ChatGPT account. Yep. So all of that personal identifiable information, all of that corporate financial risk and actuarial data was just put into a public third-party tool in breach of various bits of the GDPR and probably some other things as well. The story ends with the organization, they caught it, or they saw it happened, and they ended up referring themselves to the ICO to say, look, we've inadvertently done that. That analyst wasn't being malicious. I actually don't know. Somebody needs to go back and find out whether they had access to a tool internally or not, but they didn't think there was anything untoward with it. And why would they? They're not a security professional. So why would they be thinking that? So that's the organization being exposed to risk just by virtue of our people trying to go fast and be efficient and do their job to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean a little bit when I talk about the consumerization of IT. It's like, and you see this when people go, oh, that tool's not quick enough, or I don't like the interface or whatever. The cost to switch in consumer IT, if you open The Verge or something, it says, "Oh, Claude's out of date now. You've got to go to Gemini or use the new model." So people are moving from tool to tool to tool to tool, and they do that in their outside of work life. They kind of expect to do that in their business day as well. And as an IT organization, we've got to keep a handle on that, so that we can then defend or manage risk. Defend is probably the wrong phrase here. It's managing the risk associated with that. Do we tolerate this risk? And if we don't, what then controls do we put around it? So the shadow Gen AI use case is I think it's a big one. I actually worked with an organization where this was a business critical situation. They had a lot of developers, so developing software was part of their competitive advantage, and the CTO was very determined that they use AI tools to improve the productivity of their developers. But the cybersecurity organization was very concerned of the risks, because our competitive advantage comes from this code. So how do we make sure that we're not letting proprietary, I'm going to say algorithms in the loosest sense of the word, proprietary algorithms, proprietary code, how do we make sure we're managing the risk associated with using these tools so that we don't inadvertently lose our competitive advantage? So that was a logjam. Until they could resolve the security issue, they were constrained from using the tool. So this is not a theoretical exposure. This is a foundational concern for a lot of organizations today.
Yeah, but I guess people need to collaborate, right? So how do you distinguish between kind of genuine kind of collaborative sharing of data versus what potentially smells a bit fishy or malicious?
Well, and this is where I was saying the notion of that, define the policies in my ivory tower ahead of time and roll those out. That's where that approach becomes difficult, because unless and until I see what's going on actually in my organization, see what's going on and then figure out which is tolerable and which isn't tolerable. And that's the advantage of looking at it this way versus trying to predict and prescribe what good looks like. One example I also wanted to throw out there as well, I've got source code protection in here. Those organizations, you don't have to be a software house to have developers, and competitive advantage often comes from what your developers are doing. I've heard on more than one occasion that the example where developers they take corporate code and they move it from the corporate Git repo to their own, because they're going to, in inverted commas, work on it over the weekend, and it's easier to do that from my own repo. That, in my experience, is code for there are fewer security restrictions, which, if I'm the developer in question, there's none of that hassle about me having to, whatever it is it might be. But from the organization, so, okay, that's risk. Yeah. And again, it's what's my risk appetite for this? I would submit that it's very difficult as an organization to define what your risk appetite is unless and until you can see what's happening. And that's the real point there, get the visibility in there. So from our point of view, seeing what's happening with data movement is front and center. And that's where one of the areas where we differ from the classic approach. Then you can think about how you respond to that and which of these data movements do you actually tolerate because they're important for the execution of the business, and which one of these do you put controls around, or which one of these do you just, and here's the real thing, what we actually want is an overall improvement to the security posture of the organization, right? And I think having controls in place and blocks that stop people doing stuff is a part of that, but also a part of that is helping people make the right decision at the point at which they might make the wrong decision. And there's some grey area. Here's another real example. A while ago, I I have it in my Slack history with my interaction with the Mimecast bot. It says, "You've just moved some data somewhere you shouldn't have done."
Yeah.
Yes, I did. The reason I did was I was working with a third party. In this example, it was CrowdStrike, and I moved some corporate Mimecast marketing material into I think it's box folder. And the reason I did that is because I was working with a colleague from CrowdStrike on a presentation. CrowdStrike use Box, Mimecast don't. There isn't an approved tool for both organizations.
Yeah.
We don't have one file sharing tool that we both use. So someone had to compromise. John at CrowdStrike was quicker than me in setting up the folder, so I had to compromise. But it was flagged, and I just ticked the radio button that said, "I'm doing this for my job." So that transaction, the whole sequence is available for inspection if someone wants to.
Yeah.
But 5 seconds of friction for me to think, yeah, am I doing this? Is this a sensible thing to do? Is it a risky thing to do? Okay, make that risk assessment, know that it's been logged, but get on with my job. Not having to raise a ticket, wait for my manager to approve it, consume someone's time in IT, none of that. We just got on with making
so it's like an education element to it.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. So if we think specifically about Incydr, the Mimecast solution to this problem, and what's unique about it. We talked moments ago about the downsides of the classic approach that we've all grown up with. Although I've got six bullets on here, I'd put them down into 3 areas. The first one is that you're up and running, deriving value from the Mimecast technology very, very quickly. I mean, literally order of 4 weeks. So deploy the solution, you're getting data and insight within the first day. You're getting a picture of what's really going on inside your organization and surfacing new risk within 4 weeks. As I said, I haven't worked with an organization yet that hasn't seen in that 4-week period something they didn't know about that they, I'm going to say, are glad they knew about it. A couple of them are glad they know about it because they've had to do something about it. But the organizationally was necessary. It's easy to get up and running, relatively lightweight, but it's also operationally easy as well. There's no point deploying a new tool into your organization if you need a team of 6 people to run it, because quite frankly, no one has that extra manpower. So the tool is, I think, focused on surfacing the areas of most risk or biggest risk that can be actioned in a way that is relatively lightweight. The second area is, I've labeled this point, so I won't label it anymore right now, but we surface unknown risk. The classic approach is great for the things that I know to be looking for, the policies rules that I can define ahead of time. What about those unknown unknowns? That's an area where Incydr provides differentiated value because we see everything and you can help form that picture of risk. And the third thing, which is the question you've just asked me, is, okay, how do we respond to this? And again, there's a classic response that says, "Thou shalt block." And there are certainly times when that's the right thing to do. But as part of what I would say is a graduated set of response controls that we can deploy, a lot of it is user re-education. So it's stopping someone at the point at which they're moving data and just asking them the question. And the question I'm really asking is, would you please stop and think before you do this? Is this something that you want to be doing? 95% of the time, that's enough to have someone think, because when you ask the question, there's 2 things going on. One is, okay, I should think about this. And the second one is subconsciously, okay, the organization knows I'm doing this. So those 2 things are very, very powerful in terms of changing people's behavior. And they are, again, zero labor intervention. The technology does it. I don't need a person to do it. We've got a case study with, actually, it's CrowdStrike again, and they found that make sure I get the numbers right, I think within the first 4 months of deploying, they had a 30% reduction in basically inadvertent, overly permissive file sharing with zero intervention from IT. Now, I like to use that organization because they're a security organization as well. I think you can reasonably assume that their user population probably has a higher than average security awareness. And still they derived benefit from users, again, trying to go fast, trying to work smart, but they derive benefit from having that extra set of observation and response controls in there. So they're the three areas that really set the Incydr approach apart from what people have traditionally experienced.
Yeah, we talked like a bit, and I did in my intro about kind of data classification being kind of really difficult, time consuming. Like playing devil's advocate here, there's not, but by not doing that, we're not introducing like risk.
Possibly. Look, the thing here is there's always a trade-off, right? So if you could perfectly classify every data asset, then of course that's richer information. But pragmatically, do you want to not do anything on the promise of perfect classification? And I think that's depending on the situation, that there are organizations for whom that absolute classification is really the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of organizations for whom getting something going is better than not having anything at all. And if I just give you this example, if I were to download to this, I work in a sales organization. If I were to download something from our CRM system and email it to my own personal email address, I would submit, you don't need to know what that data asset was to get the picture that says, hang on a second, Malcolm shouldn't be doing that. There's no business reason for him to take corporate data from our CRM system and email it to himself.
Yeah.
So I can get you that picture on that kind of risk event without any of the heavy lifting of classifying all the data. So it's very, very powerful. Now, if your data is classified, if you have got MIP tags on stuff and whatever, we can look at that. So it's not to say that we will ignore that stuff.
Okay, so we've been on that purview journey.
Yeah.
Then that work is not undone.
Not at all. So we can use that, and we might say, well, Malcolm's downloaded something and he's emailed it to himself, and we might take two transactions and go, well, we're going to start working on the event where what he's emailed to himself is labeled confidential versus the one that's labeled public, right? So we can differentiate that if you've done that work.
Okay.
But for a lot of organizations that either haven't satisfactorily finished that journey or don't know where to start. So that's it's a complementary approach. The final thing I'll say, actually, we're talking about the just looking about time. One thing I want to say there is, additionally as well, a lot of people, when I talk with them, they're talking about, okay, well, don't you need to know what's in the data asset? Don't you need to know what the contents of the file are, or to form this opinion? And again, the answer broadly is no, we don't need to, but optionally we can, and then inform the opinion of risk we've got. So, and the reason this is top of mind for you today, I've just read something about somebody incurring an $80,000 Google Gemini bill because they inadvertently, their API token had been leaked to the wild, and someone had scraped it from GitHub and used their API key without their knowledge. And this is something that we actually see quite a lot, is secret keys and API keys being shared in places they shouldn't be for documents that are overly permissive or sent to places they shouldn't be, and that exposes the organization's risk, as does, the usual PII, credit card numbers, bank details, pictures of passports, all of that stuff. So we can scan and look for that and take that as a data point to say, hey, this transaction contains some PII. Maybe you want to look at that more than this other transaction. But you don't need to know what data I downloaded from our CRM system to form an opinion that says we need to investigate that.
Yeah.
If I can tell you it was a load of customer phone numbers, then you might bubble that to the top. But it's enrichment information, not necessarily core information.
Yeah, I guess same goes to code from your repository.
Yeah, sort of yes, exactly. So, what I will do sometimes, the question that forms if talking at this point with people is, okay, so how does it work? And the answer is I'm not going to go through that's quite a detailed picture I'm throwing up here, but it's actually, it's a lot easier, a lot more lightweight than this picture would suggest. We deploy an agent on end user devices, and that has sight of data moving across someone's laptop. So we see where the data assets acquired from. There's typically the sources that they're on the left, whether it's messaging system, storage, wherever it came from. And then we see where that data asset went. And that could be internet properties. That could be through a browser. It could be working with developers or whatever. It could be things like SFTP and curl and that kind of upload. It could be over messaging systems, whether that's email or actually, I mentioned things that you may not be expecting to see. I've been doing this a while now, and I'm still genuinely amazed the number of organizations that say to me, yeah, we don't have any WhatsApp in our organization, right up until the point where we put Incydr in and they say, oh God, there's a lot of WhatsApp and Discord and Viber happening. It's like, yeah, so those messaging systems are an interesting way of people just stick their clients or go to the web.whatsapp.com and they share files that they probably shouldn't be. But also local network devices. It could be local network file shares.
Yeah.
It could be printing. It could be USB. And yes, you may have controls for USB elsewhere in your organization or your tech stack. I've worked with more than one organization where I've said, yes, we have this, and users have found a way. And Incydr reveals that. So I like to say good old-fashioned data exfiltration. I'll print it out and I'll carry it out in my briefcase. Still happens. We still see some, not super frequent, but we do see it. And we complement then what you see from traversing the device. We also can put connectors in the cloud properties in the 365 environment, in G Suite, in Box or whatever, and that sees the transactions from that perspective as well. So we form the view in the two different locations, what's happening on someone's device, how's that credential being seen in the 365 environment. We reconcile those two things, and then if there's a difference, we can flag that as well. Hey, Malcolm's credentials are doing a 365 transaction that we're not seeing from his laptop. And when we see an unreconciled event, that's also potentially risk. So that helps inform things there. So a short version of how we do it. There's one other point I'll make. We can grab information from other parts of the tech stack. So I mentioned about the departing employee use case.
Yeah.
On the assumption that that's in an HR system somewhere, which you'd expect it to be, that information can be just pulled from Workday, Bamboo, whatever it might be. So it's not like you have to maintain extra work in IT. It's just a little thing that says automatically when HR flag this, that can be inherited. Someone's automatically added to a watch list. Their risk profile changes in the tool, and that just automatically happens. So we can inherit the information from other systems. But also then when we see something that we want to take action on, you might want to do that from inside the tool, no pun intended. But you might also want to communicate with other parts of the tech stack. So for example, we could raise an alert within Incydr to prompt someone to go do something. or we could raise a ticket in your service management system. So we could connect ServiceNow or whatever, and instead of and basically put a ticket in someone's queue to say, go investigate.
Is that like an open API if you want to integrate with like your SOAR or your EDR or your SIEM or whatever? You just doesn't matter.
Yeah, so we've got some pre-built integrations for so we've got an open API as well. So the list keeps changing, so I'm always out of date with what we do have the out-of-the-box integrations with. But if there's one that's not there, it is possible because we have API access and it's fully documented, and you can roll your own.
Cool. And I guess this like image on the slide here just takes back to my first point. This is why it's hard. There's a myriad of places where data lives. There's an infinite number of places where data can go. So trying to plug all your fingers in all those ducks at the same time becomes a bit like
it becomes incredibly hard. And I think back to sort of this time last year, and people probably won't remember, but the most popular app in the Apple App Store in January last year was DeepSeek. So DeepSeek got a lot of consumer attention, and then people started using it in the corporate environment. And so a lot of IT organizations were suddenly confronted with, well, if they knew to be looking for it, they were confronted with this. They probably weren't blocking it because they didn't know about it. So it's this whack-a-mole between IT organizations and their users to put the right risk controls in place. Incydr customers or organizations that were using Incydr didn't have any of that because we saw DeepSeek, we added it to our list of interesting AI tools. It popped up on the dashboards and people could quickly make a decision as to, do I tick a box to block that or do I let people continue using it? So there is complexity out there. The creativity of our user population to do things that expose us to risk, I think, can't be underestimated. And it's how do we keep up with them, but also how do we find the things in that set of behaviors that are actually necessary or certainly enabling for work and maintaining that balance. So it's a fine line.
Cool. Thanks for that. I don't know if we've have any questions in the chat, or Alex, if you've been compiling any. So talked about kind of proof of concept. Proof of value. What's the process for that if people are potentially interested?
Yeah, if people are interested in figuring out how this would help their organization, very, very happy. We can obviously contact your Saepio account team, but and we'll work with them to get the technology into your organization. Process-wise, we would work with you on defining, okay, what are the things of interest? Let's make sure that we both agree going in, these are the things we're looking for, and this is what things we're trying to get visibility into, what we're trying to catch. But technically, it's a matter of getting the Incydr agents, and 99 times out of 100 will deploy it into someone's MDM and then roll it out to a population of users. In initial phase, I'd say just roll it out to get the visibility. So typically it's about an hour's worth of work to get with the admin team to get the client provisioned into the MDM and get us to understand the environment, roll it out to a number of users, start gathering the data, and then we would typically meet weekly to see what's been seen and then start to tune, figure out what's the signal and what's the noise. Because when you see all the transactions that are going on, there is an amount of noise that needs to be filtered out, but you can quickly get into the signal and say, okay, what do we want to be alerted on? What do we not want to be alerted on? Over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, probably end up at the end of that period, we typically produce some sort of report as to if these were the data assets you were concerned about, these were possibly the risk vectors you were concerned about, this is what we've seen, this is what we've seen that you weren't expecting. I'll say hopefully we won't see any really egregious examples, but oftentimes we see things that are almost, let's stop the POV right now while you go and deal with this live risk that's happening. We've seen that. The good thing is, at least the organisation's empowered now. The bad thing is it was happening, but hey, knowledge is the first step to remedy. So.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of, unless we have any further questions on the chat, I think we're probably about done. And just to kind of circle back to the start, like I said, it starts with visibility, right? We need to understand what's going on. So if you want to understand what's going on, great idea would be to spin up a POV, kind of minimum effort. Worst case, you know more than you did before. So yeah, there's no harm. That knowledge is power and all that kind of stuff. So I assume we can send out a generic kind of that sample POC kind of output.
Yeah,
follow up.
Yeah, I can make available a representative.
Make sure you share that in the correct.
We'll figure out the right way to share it. So
Yeah,
I don't
please.
The claxons going on my Incydr risk. But yeah, we'll get a report available, make it available to people of what they can expect to see if they were to go down the pilot POV type route. All names will be changed to protect the guilty.
Cool. So if anyone's interested in that, then please let your Saepio account manager know. Otherwise, I would say thank you to Malcolm for hosting me and for this informative session. Thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, if you've got any subsequent questions, again, please direct them to your account manager. Otherwise, have a great morning and see you soon on the next Cyber Expert series.